Have you ever considered what secrets were hidden after the Great Flood? So terrible that even angels were afraid to speak of them again? What if I told you the true horror didn't stop with the destruction of the giants, but began with the women who bore them? These weren't ordinary women. They were the ones who prioritized their own desires over obedience and passion over purity. They fell in love with beings from another realm, fallen angels who had rebelled against God. For this choice, they paid a price no one talks about until now. This isn't just a story of rebellion. It's the untold aftermath. It's what happened after the heavens went to war, after the Nephilim were wiped out, after the earth was purified. Because even after the floodwaters went down, there were still consequences to be carried out, consequences so severe and chilling that only one being could deliver them. Archangel Michael, the commander of heaven's armies and the sword of divine justice. But here's the shocking part. Michael didn't just punish the angels. He turned his attention to their wives, the human women who had partnered with darkness. What he did next would leave a permanent mark on the spiritual world. Could their souls still be calling to us today? Do they exist in myths as sirens, luring the living with voices filled with sorrow and fury? Before we reveal the full truth, please comment in this video if you feel the mystery pulling at your spirit. And if you are one of the many who support this channel with your encouragement and presence, thank you deeply. Your light helps us uncover what has been hidden for so long. Stay with us, because the deeper we go, the more the veil will be lifted. What Archangel Michael did was not just a punishment. It was a prophecy. Once you hear it, you may never view ancient stories the same way again. Are you ready to enter the unknown? Let's begin Archangel Michael's shocking act against the wives of the fallen angels. Have you ever heard the saying that a single glance can change the course of destiny? What if I told you that one look not from a man, but from heaven's most powerful beings, was enough to tear apart divine order itself? This isn't just another story of forbidden love. It is the greatest tragedy of love at first sight ever recorded. One so serious, it disrupted the balance between heaven and earth. In the heavenly realms, all was pure, orderly, and radiant. The angels, God's messengers and warriors, were fulfilling their sacred duties, singing praises, maintaining the beauty of creation, and serving as protectors of divine law. They were created to serve and obey, with no desires of their own beyond the will of the Almighty. Their purpose was clear, their loyalty unquestioned. But then something changed. One day, as they looked down from the heights of heaven, their eyes fell upon the earth. What they saw wasn't chaos or sin, not yet at least. What they saw was beauty, but not the kind they were used to. It wasn't the perfection of celestial beings or the glory of stars. It was human beauty, imperfect, vulnerable, real, and it captivated them. The women of earth, with their raw emotions, gentle strength, and mortal charm, awakened something inside the angels that had never been there before. It was unlike anything they had ever felt. How could beings made of light and holiness begin to desire flesh and fragility? What was it about these women that made angels, eternal and wise, willing to abandon everything they were created for? Genesis 6:2 records, the moment this divine boundary was crossed, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from any they chose. This moment, this first look, would mark the beginning of a downfall. It was the spark that ignited a chain of rebellion, corruption, and ultimately, divine judgment. But the deeper question remains. If even angels can fall because of desire, what does that say about the power of human love and the dangers of loving outside God's will? This is where the story takes a dramatic and perilous turn. The angels, once unaffected by the world's temptations, began to experience something alien and powerful. It started as a subtle fascination, like a whisper on the wind, but with every passing glance toward earth, that whisper grew louder, becoming a voice they couldn't silence. What was this strange pull they felt? Why did it awaken such longing in beings who are created to be above desire? It wasn't just admiration anymore. It was a craving, an obsession, a fire igniting in hearts that were never meant to burn with earthly passion. These weren't minor angels. They were the sons of God, heavenly watchers, guardians of divine order. Yet each time they looked down, the boundaries of heaven blurred a little more. The pure and unwavering light that once radiated from them began to flicker. Their glory, meant to reflect God's holiness, started to dim as forbidden thoughts entered their minds. Meanwhile, on earth, the women went on with their lives, completely unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding above them. They baked bread, sang songs, tended fields, and told stories by firelight, never knowing that their beauty, laughter, and warmth had become the downfall of the watchers in the sky. These women, simply by being human, became the unknowing center of a divine rebellion. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be watched not by people, but by celestial beings angels meant to guard, now longing to possess? What happens when holy watchers break their silence, not to protect, but to pursue? As it is written in Jude 1-6, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." The heavens were becoming restless. The air was thick with tension. A choice was about to be made, one that would send ripples through eternity. As the angels leaned closer to the world of flesh, the skies above began to change. But the strange energy wasn't just felt in heaven. On earth, something began to stir within the women too, something they couldn't quite explain. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't peace either. It was as if they could sense unseen eyes on them, watching not with malice, but with intensity. They felt chosen, though they didn't know why. Suddenly, ordinary days felt extraordinary. The breeze that brushed their faces carried a strange electricity, and even the silence of the night seemed to whisper secrets. Have you ever stood outside just moments before a storm breaks, when the wind dies down and the air feels alive, thick with tension and mystery? That's what it was like for these women. Every heartbeat felt louder, every glance over the shoulder more urgent. The skies looked normal, yet something about them hinted that a change was coming, not just in the clouds, but in the very fabric of the world. They didn't realize that their presence had become the center of a spiritual war. Their smiles, their laughter, their grace, it was drawing angels down from the heights of glory. The invisible barrier between the eternal and the earthly was thinning, and deep down, something inside them knew that life as they knew it was on the verge of a transformation. Was it fate? Was it temptation? Or had they unknowingly become part of a story written long before their birth? Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." But what happens when heavenly beings try to force a season that God never intended? The world itself felt like it was holding its breath. Animals grew restless. The wind carried a hum, like creation bracing itself for a collision it couldn't stop. And still the women went on, not knowing that destiny dark, divine, and irreversible was already on its way. The angels were fully aware that they were on a dangerous path, one lit not by holy fire, but by the flames of rebellion. They knew the line they were approaching wasn't just forbiddance. It was sacred. They had been created as divine messengers, warriors of light, sworn to serve the will of the Most High. Every part of their being was built for obedience, for praise, for purity. Yet something had changed. The longer they gazed upon earth, the more they hesitated in their duties, the more they dreamed of something they were never meant to desire. Each time the thought of leaving heaven crossed their minds, guilt surged through them. They remembered the celestial courts, the glory of God's throne, and the honor of bearing his light. But then another thought would rise, stronger, more seductive. What if there was something more? What if humans weren't just lesser beings, but a gateway to an experience angels could never have unless they crossed the line? Questions once unthinkable now echoed in their minds. What does it feel like to love with the depth of human longing? Could we feel the warmth of mortal touch, the ache of joy and heartbreak intertwined? Would we finally understand what it's like to be truly known, not as a servant, but as a lover? Their hearts, once filled only with the light of God's presence, began to carry the shadows of yearning. Is it possible for a being of heaven to love something more than God? Could a heart designed to reflect divine worship be twisted toward earthly pleasure? Scriptures give us a chilling reminder in Isaiah 14:12-14, where Lucifer himself declared, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Desire outside of God's will is the seed from which all rebellion grows. And so the angels stood on the edge, torn between what they were created to be and what they now secretly longed to become. The pull was no longer just a feeling. It was a force, one that threatened to drag them down from the heavens forever. Day by day, the pull grew stronger, and day by day, more angels found themselves unable to resist the growing fascination with humanity. What started as a silent curiosity became a secret gathering. One by one, they began to watch the earth below, not out of duty, but out of desire. What they saw enchanted them. Laughter around fires, gentle embraces, tears shed under moonlight. These were emotions they had never known. And with every sunrise, their resolve began to crumble. They had been present at the dawn of creation. They had watched as God spoke galaxies into existence and scattered the stars like dust. They had sung as the oceans were carved and the mountains raised. Yet now, all of that glory was beginning to fade in their hearts, overshadowed by a yearning they could not control. Each angel stood at a crossroads. Should they remain loyal to their divine assignment, or surrender to the promise of a love they could never truly possess? What is it that makes the forbidden so irresistible? Could it be that the very boundaries God sets are the ones that test the deepest truths of our hearts? Heaven and earth were never meant to intertwine this way. The realms were designed to remain separate, each with its own laws, its own purpose. But the angels were now willing to abandon everything they had been: celestial warriors, eternal messengers, servants of the Most High, for a fleeting chance at mortal love. Could they even comprehend the cost? This was no small decision. This was not an act of curiosity. It was an act of rebellion. The book of Enoch tells us that 200 angels gathered together, led by a being named Samjaza, and made a pact. They swore an oath, bound by fear and desire, that they would descend to earth together, so that none of them would face judgment alone. But judgment was unavoidable. Their choice would not only change their destiny, it would change the world. It would give birth to giants, to destruction, to the rise of wickedness that would make God himself grieve over creation. As it says in Genesis 6-5, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." The heavens were about to shake. The earth was about to groan under the weight of corruption. And those angels, so captivated by human beauty, were about to learn a truth that echoes through eternity. No matter how compelling the reason may seem, some divine laws are never meant to be broken. The moment these angels, no longer messengers of God, but now outcasts, set foot on the earth, a strange enchantment rippled through the natural world. But this wasn't the kind of magic that brings healing or hope. This was something far more dangerous. It was the kind of beauty that doesn't lift you up, but pulls you under, like a riptide. Imagine the most breathtaking person you've ever seen. Now imagine them 1,000 times more radiant, more flawless, more unearthly. That's what they looked like. But their beauty wasn't just visual. It was supernatural. They didn't walk like men. They moved as if gravity no longer applied to them, gliding through the air with impossible grace. Their voices didn't sound human either. When they spoke, it wasn't speech. It was a melody, pure and seductive, resonating not just in ears, but in souls. And the light, they didn't just reflect it, they wore it. Air presence made everything around them fade into dullness. Flowers seemed to lean toward them. Birds went silent. The air itself shimmered. When they entered villages, it was as if time slowed down. Farmers dropped their tools. Mothers paused mid-sentence. Children forgot their games. All eyes turned to these dazzling figures, unable to resist. Looking at them was like staring into the sun so brilliant it hurt, yet no one could turn away. The women who saw them felt something awaken within, an ache, a hunger, a fire that had no name. This wasn't ordinary attraction. It felt like destiny or a spell. What would you do if someone beyond your understanding stepped into your life and made you feel like you were the only person in the universe? Could you resist? Would you even want to? These weren't just striking strangers. They were perfection, perfection wrapped in mystery, walking among mortals like living dreams. Their skin glowed with a light like moonlit silver. Their eyes shimmered with starlight, yet seemed to hold knowledge older than the earth itself. And when they smiled, hearts melted, but something inside also stirred with unease, because behind that divine smile, something was wrong. They were beautiful, yes, but their beauty was laced with shadow. Their charm felt too smooth, too flawless. The scriptures warn us in 2 Corinthians 11:14, Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. And if the prince of darkness can appear beautiful, how much more deceptive could these fallen beings be? Their enchanting smiles concealed ancient secrets. Their mesmerizing eyes held the weight of heavenly rebellion and the coldness of immortality. The women they approached felt drawn like moths to a flame, caught between awe and helplessness. How could they resist someone who glowed with celestial light, someone who knew their thoughts, their fears, and their desires without needing a word spoke, someone who offered them not just attention, but impossible, intoxicating promises that no human man could ever match? But deep down, the world itself seemed to flinch. Nature knew, heaven knew, and soon even the women who fell for them would learn this was no fairy tale. This was the beginning of something dark, something that heaven would not let stand. But here is where the story truly becomes unsettling. The frightening part wasn't just what the angels had done. It was what began happening to the women. The longer they stayed near these fallen beings, the more they started to change. It was subtle at first, a strange glow in their eyes, a shift in their energy. They began to carry a presence that others could sense, but couldn't explain. It was as if the divinity the angels once held had begun to seep into them, altering them body, mind, and spirit. They no longer saw the world the same way. Daily life, which once brought comfort and meaning, now seemed hollow and dull. The touch of a human husband, the rhythm of an earthly routine, none of it satisfied them anymore. They had tasted something forbidden, and now they were forever changed. Normal men seemed small and insignificant. Their eyes, once open to simple joys, were now fixed on something far more dazzling and dangerous. Was this love or possession? Were these women truly chosen, or simply being used? The fallen angels knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't pick at random from the heights of heaven. They had already marked the ones they desired the most radiant, the most alluring, the ones whose spirits shone bright even in the darkness of earth. And once they arrived, they used all their powers, divine knowledge, charm, the illusion of perfect love, to become everything these women had ever dreamed of. They whispered promises only angels could know. They became the embodiment of fantasy. But what seemed like a dream was in truth the opening act of a nightmare. It looked like romance, it felt like destiny, but in reality, it was a divine violation. Each time one of these celestial rebels took a woman as his wife, the fabric of the universe trembled. Heaven felt the breach. Earth felt the consequence. These were not mere marriages. These were unholy covenants forged without God's blessing, built on disobedience and desire. and the ripple effects reached far beyond what anyone could see. Genesis 6-4 gives us a chilling glimpse. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. But what kind of heroes were they? Were they saviors or monsters? Because the true horror was still to come. The children born from these forbidden unions were not ordinary. They were giants, titans, beings with power that no human could control and no angel could redeem. These offspring, half angel, half human, would turn the world into a place of chaos and terror. And so the question remains, what happens when divine beings cross sacred lines, when love becomes lust and blessings become curses? The answer lies in the next chapter of the story, where these children, the Nephilim, rise from the wombs of mortal women and bring upon the world a darkness that even heaven can no longer ignore. Now let me reveal the terrifying truth about the offspring of these forbidden unions, the Nephilim. These were not ordinary children. They were the cursed fruit of angelic rebellion and human vulnerability. From the moment they took their first breath, it was clear they did not belong to either world. They were too large for cradles, too strong for swaddling clothes, and they did not stop growing. Their bodies surged with power, and their hunger grew just as fast. Imagine a child born from divine power and human flesh, a being whose growth didn't slow with time but accelerated. These weren't just big kids. They were giants towering over trees, their shadows swallowing entire streets. When a Nephilim walked, the very earth trembled beneath their massive feet. When they cried, the sound echoed like thunder rolling through mountains. When they shouted in rage, villages heard it from miles away. They were terrifyingly strong enough to tear through stone walls, to uproot forests, to crush armies without effort. But their strength was only half the danger. These giants inherited their father's celestial abilities, strength, perception, power, but none of their divine restraint. And from their mothers, they gained emotion, jealousy, pride, anger, without the human conscience to tame it. Imagine the emotional outburst of a toddler. Now imagine that toddler the size of a house, with the strength to level cities. This was not fantasy. It was a waking nightmare. The world was suddenly home to beings too powerful to control and too immature to understand mercy. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in constant fear, not of storms or wild beasts, but of your own neighbor's children? Entire cities lived in dread of the Nephilim. People whispered their names with trembling lips, hoping not to draw their attention. Farmers abandoned their fields. Fishermen stopped sailing. Markets closed. No one wanted to be seen when the giants came, and the Nephilim came often. They took what they wanted without apology. They ate what they saw: livestock, harvests, even people. Nothing was sacred, nothing was safe. Some grew as tall as towers, others as wide as the gates of cities. But worst of all, they weren't mindless. They were intelligent. They could speak, reason, and plot, and with that cunning came cruelty. The book of Enoch paints a chilling picture of this era, saying, "They consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." It was more than destruction. It was judgment unfolding in slow, terrifying motion. The Nephilim were not merely a threat to villages. They were a threat to the balance of creation itself. Heaven watched in sorrow. The earth groaned beneath their weight. And God prepared his response. Because something this unnatural could not go on forever. High above the chaos, seated on the throne of eternity, God looked down upon the earth he had once called very good. But now that good creation was unraveling. The harmony he had spoken into being was being drowned out by the sound of fear and bloodshed. What he had formed with his hands was now being crushed under the feet of giants who were never meant to exist. The Nephilim, the cursed offspring of rebellion, had turned earth into a battlefield of shadows and sorrow. And the ones suffering most were the very people God had breathed life into his beloved humans. Each day, the cries of the innocent rose like smoke to heaven mothers, hiding their children, villagers abandoning their homes, prayers whispered through tears, asking if anyone would come, asking if heaven still cared. And God heard every cry. He saw every injustice. The giants thought themselves unstoppable, but the Creator was not blind. His anger, though slow to rise, began to burn like a righteous fire. Judgment was stirring. That was when heaven's most powerful warriors prepared to descend. The archangels, beings of immense might and unwavering loyalty, were summoned to war. Michael, the commander; Gabriel, the messenger; Uriel, the flame of truth; Raphael, the healer turned warrior. These were not just celestial figures of peace. They were generals forged in the fire of divine justice. But even they knew this would not be like any battle fought before. They weren't facing demons or fallen spirits alone. They were going up against creatures born with angelic blood, hybrids of heaven and earth, packed with power, driven by chaos, and wrapped in flesh. And they were everywhere. The Nephilim were not scattered. They had multiplied. They had claimed dominion. The earth had become their playground, and humanity their prey. Could even heaven's mightiest stop what had now grown so far out of control? The archangels gathered their forces, brilliant legions that stretched across the skies. But they didn't move quickly. This was not a battle they could charge into blindly. Every step was planned, every strike calculated. They had to fight not only with strength, but with the wisdom of heaven itself. The Nephilim were cunning, they were fast, and they were angry. But here's the thing about serving the Most High. When you go to war in His name, you're never unprepared. For every rebellion, heaven has a response. For every corrupted creature, there is a cleansing fire. And for every darkness that rises, God already has a plan to bring it down. Do you remember what Romans 12:19 says? "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." This wasn't just a mission. This was a divine reckoning. And leading the charge was Michael. He didn't just carry a sword. He carried the full weight of God's justice in his hand. When even the archangels, those towering warriors of heaven, began to struggle under the weight of the Nephilim's might, the sky itself seemed to grow still. It was then that God, in his divine mercy and fierce justice, chose to act. He would not let corruption swallow his creation. He would not allow the earth, meant to be a garden of life, to become a graveyard of terror. And so the decision was made, not just to strike, but to cleanse. God revealed a plan unlike anything the world had ever known. It would not be carried out by sword alone, but by the hand of nature itself. A flood, vast, merciless, divine, would rise from the depths and fall from the heavens. It would sweep away all that had been defiled, not out of rage, but out of sorrow. Not just to destroy, but to begin again. Genesis 6:13 echoes this solemn moment. "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth." And so it began. The battle erupted like the opening of a divine storm. Archangels clashed with giants in fields soaked with rain. Blades forged in heaven met fists the size of boulders. The sky itself turned into a war zone. Lightning cracking open the clouds, thunder booming like the voice of God across the earth. Mountains quaked, forests caught fire from celestial strikes. The Nephilim, so used to dominance, now trembled as they faced the wrath they never believed would come. And then came the rain, not a soft drizzle, not even a thunderstorm. This was something else entirely. The heavens opened with a roar. Water crashed down like judgment made liquid. Rivers overflowed in seconds. Valleys vanished beneath rising waves. The ground split and groaned. The flood was not just water. It was God's grief, his final verdict upon a world that had lost its way. For the first time since their unnatural birth, the Nephilim felt something new, something unfamiliar and paralyzing. Fear. It was etched into their massive faces. It echoed in their cries. These creatures who once terrorized the world now begged for mercy they had never shown to others. But mercy had already come and gone. What happens when even giants fall to their knees? When divine patience runs out? When God himself declares, "No more"? Everyone knew in that moment, angel, human, and Nephilim alike, that a sacred line had been crossed. A boundary never meant to be touched had been shattered. And now all of creation was paying the price. This was not just the end of an age. It was the beginning of something new. But first, everything unholy had to be washed away. Have you ever seen storm clouds so thick, so dark, that they seem to swallow the very sun? Now imagine that darkness multiplied 1,000,000 times, so dense that day became night, not because of time, but because of wrath. That's how it began the day God declared that enough was enough. The sky didn't merely darken. It turned black, a kind of black that feels alive, pressing down on everything beneath it. The air thickened with a silence that roared, a pressure so heavy it felt like even the earth was holding its breath. At first, people were confused. Rain wasn't unusual. Storms came and went, but this was different. The clouds didn't move. They hovered. The wind didn't blow. It screamed. And then came the rain, not gentle, not cleansing. These weren't the nourishing drops that brought crops to life. These were heaven's tears, thick, heavy, filled with sorrow and fury. They didn't fall. They pounded like hammers from above, like drums of war, announcing the arrival of judgment. Hour after hour, day after day, the rain never stopped. It didn't pause. It didn't soften. It poured like it had a purpose, and it did. The purpose was to cleanse, to erase, to reset a world gone too far. Even the mighty Nephilim, the terror of nations, the nightmares of men, began to panic. Their confidence melted into confusion. Their booming laughter turned into silence. These giants who had split trees with their fists and broken bones with their roars now trembled like lost children. They tried to escape. They raced toward mountains, climbing to the highest peaks they could find, their massive hands digging into the stone like desperate animals. But the water kept rising, higher and higher, until the peaks disappeared beneath the waves, like everything else. For the first time, their power meant nothing. Strength couldn't stop the flood. Height couldn't save them. Intelligence couldn't outwit it. The very creation they had mocked, the rain, the rivers, the sea, had now risen up in obedience to the voice of its creator. Can you imagine the sound? The screams of men, women, children, the guttural cries of the Nephilim, the helpless sobs of those who had laughed at Noah, who had mocked the warnings, now crying out for mercy when mercy had already closed its door. And the fallen angels, those once glorious beings who had caused this ruin, watched it unfold, trapped between heaven and earth, powerless to stop what they had set in motion, their children, their pride, their legacy drowning. Their rebellion, once bold and beautiful, now lay shattered beneath waves that no wing could lift, no spell could calm. Some were cast into deep valleys as described in Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. Others were sealed away in spiritual realms, trapped until the final day of reckoning. They couldn't return, couldn't speak, couldn't even offer a final touch of comfort. Their arms, once wrapped around their wives, were now bound by divine command. And so the women were left to face the wreckage of what they had helped create alone, heartbroken, haunted. The answer would come not through a second flood, but through fire, because Archangel Michael had not yet finished heaven's command. But not every woman knelt in sorrow. Not every heart broke under the weight of what had been done. Some, like Nama, refused to bow. Nama, the name itself, carried the sound of silk and fire. She had once been praised for her beauty, her charm, her mesmerizing voice. Even the angels had noticed her above all others. But her beauty had become her weapon. Her pride had become her armor. And even after the flood wiped away the world she helped unravel, Nama stood tall, unrepentant. She wore her guilt like a gown, but not out of shame. It was woven of defiance. She had drunk deeply from the cup of forbidden's power and liked the taste. She had used her allure, not just to charm the angels, but to lead other women down the same path. Even as heaven rained fire in its silence, she still believed she had been right. Her pride became her prison, a cage built not with chains, but with mirrors that only reflected what she wanted to see. But God, whose justice sees through every mask, crafted a punishment not only just but poetic. They were transformed not into beasts, but into warnings, into sirens, into mermaids. Yes, those half-woman, half-creature beings of the deep, cursed to live beneath the waves. Behind the fantasy lies judgment. These women, once loved by angels and lifted above mortals, were now cursed to forever embody the very danger they had once embraced. They would be beautiful still, achingly so. Voices like music, eyes like stars. But their beauty, now a curse, would bring only destruction. Just like the angels they once loved, they would now lure others into the same kind of fall. Can you imagine such a fate? To be desired forever, but never loved. To be pursued, but never cherished. To sing songs you can't stop singing, knowing they lead others to ruin. These weren't fairy tale sirens. These were cursed souls trapped between heaven's wrath and earth's memory. And the worst punishment wasn't the curse itself. It was the memory, the knowing, the endless replaying of choices that led to the end of the world. Their minds became battlegrounds. Some descended into madness, hearing the cries of the drowned every time they closed their eyes. Others became numb, walking shadows, hollowed by guilt too deep for words. They tried to forget, but the sea never let them, because the ocean, vast and merciless, became both their prison and their stage. It whispered back their names, carried echoes of their past, and reminded them day after day that they were no longer human, no longer lovers, no longer mothers. They were reminders, warnings, living consequences of a love that crossed divine boundaries. The book of Jude hints at such eternal fates for those who abandon their place. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame. Wandering stars for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever. What more fitting image could there be? And so Nama and the others wander still, hidden in story, felt in storms, heard in the lonely cries of the sea. And what of the fallen angels, the ones chained in spiritual prisons, sealed away in the deepest darkness? Their bodies were bound, but their awareness remained wide open. That was part of the punishment. They weren't spared from the agony of consequence. In fact, they were forced to witness it. Every cry, every scream, every broken moment of the women they once loved, they felt it, not just saw it. They sensed it. The sorrow, the madness, the slow unraveling of minds gripped by guilt. It wasn't just painful. It was torment beyond words. And they could do nothing, not whisper comfort, not reach out, not even close their eyes. They had chosen rebellion, and this was their harvest. Meanwhile, the angels who had remained faithful, those who had refused to give in to temptation, were given a sacred charge. No longer just messengers, no longer just warriors, they became watchers over a wounded earth, guardians of a world that had tasted both heaven's glory and heaven's wrath. It was their duty now to make sure such defiance would never take root again. From their new posts, they observed everything. They watched the seas where the sirens still sang their songs, haunting, beautiful, deadly. These sirens were once their sisters-in-law, part of a forbidden's family tree that heaven would never fully embrace. The faithful angels did not interfere. They could not. But they listened and they remembered. They also watched humanity rise from the ashes, tentatively, painfully, village by village, garden by garden. The people tried to forget, but the memory of the flood lingered like smoke after a fire. Stories passed from father to son, mother to daughter, about giants, angels, and a sea that swallowed the earth. No one ever told the full truth, but no one ever completely let it go. It was a new chapter, a rebirth. The world had been washed clean, but clean does not mean unscarred. The faithful angels, once bold and radiant, now stood in quiet reverence. They had learned, they had seen, they had witnessed firsthand what happens when divine beings cross into human desire. And so now they kept their distance, not because they stopped caring, but because they now understood the cost. They watched from the edge of glory, hands folded, hearts guarded. Some lines are etched in eternity. Some boundaries are not merely laws. They are warnings written into the structure of the universe itself. And the angels remembered the lesson, a lesson soaked in rain, echoed in thunder, etched in sorrow. No matter how beautiful the temptation, no matter how powerful the emotion, there are places even angels should never go. So now you know, the story didn't end with the flood. The world may have been washed clean, but its echoes still ripple through time. The sirens still sing, the fallen angels still grieve in silence, and heaven still watches, remembering the day love turned to rebellion and rebellion turned to ruin. This tale isn't just a piece of forgotten mythology, or a warning buried in ancient texts. It's a mirror, a reminder that the choices we make, even out of love, carry consequences that can reach far beyond ourselves. It asks us the same question those angels once ignored. What are you willing to give up in pursuit of something forbidden? And what happens when it's too late to turn back? If this story moved you, made you feel something deep in your spirit, or revealed a truth you hadn't seen before, I invite you to comment down below to let us know you're awake and watching. Your voice matters here. Thank you to every single one of you who supports this channel through your likes, shares, and subscriptions. And a heartfelt thank you to those of you who give through Super Thanks. Your generosity helps us keep sharing these truths with the world. But even if you've never given, know this: we are still grateful for your presence, your time, and your spirit. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need this story today. Let them know the flood wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far greater. May you walk in wisdom, guarded by truth. May you recognize the sirens in your own life and have the strength to walk away. And may God bless you, protect you, and remind you always that some boundaries are sacred and some love is worth waiting for. Stay safe, stay faithful, and stay chosen.